The sound of sirens woke Clyde from his slumber. He rolled over and glanced at his alarm clock, which informed him that it was 4:25 p.m. He got up and looked out the window while in nothing but a shirt and boxers. His suspicions were not met. Fire trucks and police cars flew by his house in a hurry, instead of parking in front of it. After thinking for a moment, he realized that they were probably headed to Ralph McMahon's house. Deciding to see for himself, Clyde threw on some pants. It wasn't hard to guess where the fire trucks were headed, as a plume of smoke was easily discernible. All he had to do was follow the smoke. Clyde cut through alleyways in an effort to reduce the amount of travel time, and it worked. However, an immense pressure and grating sound formed inside of Clyde's head, which caused him to fall to his knees in pain. Agony visited itself upon Clyde for 2 minutes before relenting to a level in which he could stand. He stood there thinking for a minute before continuing toward the smoke. The bullet. The blow I took this morning must have impacted the bullet. If I'm not careful, the bullet might get knocked around in my brain and kill me. Still, though, it's not as if I have anything to lose. As sure as the sun would rise the next day, the fire was indeed at McMahon's house. A large crowd of people stood outside of the perimeter that had been set up by the police and watched as the firefighters battled the flaming building. One particular member of the crowd caught Clyde's eye. A man in a turtleneck sweater with long hair and glasses. The clerk who had been on duty at the Quick Trip the night Clyde was shot. "Where do you live?" The clerk soon had his fill, or perhaps the answers he sought, and left. Clyde followed him from a distance while trying to look casual. Clyde expected the man to hop into a car and drive off, which would have ended his tailing. But as luck, or perhaps fate would have it, the man didn't have a car and only lived a couple of blocks away. He watched ever so silently as the glasses wearer went inside his simplistic dwelling and vowed to return. And he did. At 2 a.m., the killing hour, Clyde was ready to act. He grabbed the same supplies that he had the night before and tossed them into a backpack, which he took with him. Tried and true, the pry opened the window without fail, and Clyde materialized inside of the house as if a phantom. Although dark, the house wasn't difficult to navigate, as it was lacking in the furniture department. The emotionless set out to find rooms with closed doors, due to his thought process being that a bedroom was likely to have its door closed. Indeed, a closed door was soon in sight, and snoring could be heard coming from the other side. Clyde put a gloved hand on the knob and quietly pushed the door open. Entering as he reached into his backpack to trade his pry bar for a butcher's knife. The bed contained 2 occupants, the man, who he had decided to be at fault for not telling him the Quick Trip was closed or for distracting the gunman, and a woman with raven-colored hair. A realization touched upon Clyde's mind as it went back to thinking about how the man had walked to and from the fire. how there wasn't a single vehicle in the driveway, and the lack of furniture in the house. This man was poor and incredibly similar to pre-bullet Clyde. He stared at the bed, briefly deciding with knife in hand. After a moment of thought, he simply turned around and went home. Or at least he planned to. But his backpack bumped into a shelf next to the door and knocked a ceramic jar full of change to the floor with a deafening crash. The man reached for a baseball bat next to the bed, while the woman picked up her phone and began to dial upon seeing Clyde in the doorway. The dial tone was menacing. Out of options, Clyde charged the man and stabbed with his knife. The move was foolish, and the knife embedded itself in the baseball bat. The homeowner brought his bat in for a head swing, but missed as Clyde ducked and tackled him to the ground. The two men hit the ground with Clyde on top and the clerk on bottom. Clyde's knee was on the man's chest, and his right foot was positioned on his crotch. Clyde kicked, causing the man to enter into a dazed state and let out a groan. Clyde stood up and dashed for the woman, despite his belief of being too late. However, as he dashed for her, he noticed that she was picking her cell phone off the ground. She had fumbled it while frantically trying to call the police. Clyde stomped his foot down on the woman's phone and hand. A crunch could be heard, causing him to wonder if the source was the cell phone or the woman's hand. His hands wrapped around the woman's throat and he squeezed, watching detachedly as the woman gasped and struggled. She tried to claw at his face with her uninjured hand, but failed to make contact due to panicking. He let her hit the floor with a thud after all signs of life faded from her eyes. Upon turning around, Clyde noticed that his whole purpose for stopping by was no longer present in the room. A thump originated from the living room. The emotionless entered to find his target scrambling to get back to his feet. The man's fear had betrayed him and caused him to stumble. Clyde grabbed the man's legs and pulled him into the dark kitchen, despite the man's attempts to dig into the wooden floor with his fingers. Clyde briefly let go of the man's legs and pulled a wooden chair over on top of the man, who was face down on the floor, before going over to the counter and retrieving an unwashed knife. He headed home after all loose ends were tied up. He had retrieved his butcher's knife from the bat, changed clothes, burned the old clothes in the oven, and removed the trash bags from his feet after he had stepped back onto the sidewalk. When Clyde opened his closet door to set his backpack inside, and as he did so, the most peculiar thing had happened. A ring box fell from the shelf above, hitting him on the head before settling on the floor. The grating sound returned and caused him to collapse to his knees. "Damn this noise! It's going to be the death of me," he had replied in response. After a few minutes passed, the noise and pain subsided, which allowed him to focus his attention on the jewelry box. He gently picked up the box and opened it, staring at the ring as if it were some relic of an ancient and long-forgotten era. And then he thought about how he met Annie. 4 years ago, a thinner, 20-year-old Clyde Berman had been convinced to go to a house party. that his friend Sam was throwing in celebration of having obtained his associate's degree. The party pulled no punches. There was alcohol, loud music, dancing, and a ton of young people, the whole 9 yards. However, none of that was really Clyde's sort of thing. He had only stopped by to support his friend. Looking for an excuse to get away from the music and obnoxious crowd, Clyde stepped out onto the front porch to light a cigarette. However, his eyes picked up on something, or rather someone, that interested him far more. A pretty young redhead was quietly seated alone on a bench. It was just the two of them. "Yo," he responded in a level voice.
Hi,"
replied the redhead shyly in a faint voice. An awkward silence filled the air. "Not enjoying the party?" She shook her head in response. "Me either. These types of things aren't for me. I just came because I knew Sam would want me to be here. Too bad I haven't seen him all night. Some friend, huh?"
"Well, he's probably just distracted,"
she managed. "Yeah, if I know Sam, he's already drunk and off his rocker. How do you know Sam anyway?"
"He's my cousin."
"Ah, he's my best friend, although he irritates the hell out of me at times. As much as I hung out with him before he started college, it's odd that we haven't met before, Miss
"Annie."
Clyde, say Annie."
"Yes."
"This place sucks. Wanna go get a burger?" Annie blushed and nodded in response. She began to open up to Clyde after the two sat at the burger joint, and he had a mostly one-sided conversation with her for an hour. It was after that point that the two began to see each other on a regular basis, before moving on to become inseparable. Those were the best moments of Clyde's life. Quite the opposite of how things were for him now. Warmth trickled down Clyde Berman's face as he snapped back from his thoughts. Tears, emotion,